Thank you to everyone for joining us today in today's event, The Pandemic of Loneliness. My name is Leo Bagdasarian, and I'm the Managing Director of the AIER's Bastiat Society program. The American Institute for Economic Research was founded in 1933 and is one of the oldest nonpartisan economic research and advocacy organizations in our country. With the Bastiat Society program, the AIER makes the ideas that enable peaceful trade and human flourishing available to a wider audience. Just want to note, this event would not be possible without Really Good Remedies, a San Mateo-based company that creates and implements customized wellness programs working with athletes and high-performance individuals locally and around the world. You may visit them at reallygoodremedies.com. That's reallygoodremedies.com. The events of last year and its effects have impacted millions of lives and will shape the lives of generations to come. COVID and the policy response to it has affected our businesses, families, communities, and health. Locally here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we are seeing some of the long-term consequences of last year's events and policies. These are just some of the many headlines reflecting the magnitude of those events, such as San Francisco files suit to reopen schools, citing high suicide rate among children, or San Francisco experts describe perfect storm of teen suicide, youth mental health crisis during the pandemic. Also affecting seniors, Bay Area seniors struggle with loneliness as pandemic drags on. It's four walls and a TV. And even businesses, 1 out of every 100 businesses in the San Francisco metro are permanently closed. In addition to these effects, there are others we are all seeing almost every day, such as business owners struggling to start their business, unemployment, the increase in discouraged workers, increased alcohol sales and their effects, the health on veterans, and much more. The ripple effects are large, and some won't be immediately seen, recorded, or even reported for years to come. Loneliness and the effect on mental health is just one of them. To quote Bastiat from his must-read essay, That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen, Bastiat writes, in the Department of Economy, an act, a habit, an institution, a law gives birth not only to an effect, but a series of effects. Of these effects, the first only is immediate. It manifests itself simultaneously with its cause. It is seen. The others unfold in succession. They are not seen. It is well for us if they are foreseen. In fact, it is the same for the science of health, the arts, and that of morals. Our subject matter today is quite broad. Loneliness is a fundamental part of our human experience. In observing and learning a bit more about it, we may be able to foresee and better understand the unseen aspects of our life and the society we live in. We may even discover some of the positive aspects of loneliness. Our guest today is Dr. Aleksandar Dimitrijević, who is joining us from Berlin. Dr. Dimitrijević is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst. In addition to running his private practice in Berlin, Dr. Dimitrijević teaches at the International Psychoanalytic University. He has presented to a wide range of audience throughout the US and Europe. And his online lectures have reached thousands of viewers and covered such topics as the defining trauma and the history of psychoanalysis, where he guides viewers through the history, empirical evidence, and clinical usefulness of this complex discipline. Dr. Dimitrijević has authored numerous conceptual and empirical papers about attachment theory and research, psychoanalytic education, the relationship between psychoanalysis and the arts. His works have been translated into multiple languages such as German, Hungarian, Italian, Slovenian, and Spanish, just to name a few. Now, we will have time for questions at the end. If you do have questions that come to mind, simply find my name in the list and message me directly, and I'll get to them at the end. Dr. Dimitrijević, Alexander, great to have you on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Leo, for the invitation and this generous introduction. I hope you can all hear me well. I'm totally insecure about my capacity to contribute anything to the understanding of any concept or phenomenon related to the economics, finance, business, and so on. But when we started talking about how psychoanalysis could be relevant to this, I suggested that tonight we speak about loneliness. I emphasize we, I hope we will all speak, because that is the topic I'm working on at this moment with my friend Michael Buchholz. We're working on a book that hopefully by the end of the year will be published by Phoenix in England that will be focused on loneliness. And loneliness is at this moment, I believe, everywhere around, and I assume we're all aware of it. If you just look at your screen at this moment, I have the gallery, so I can see that we are 21, and I see just one face. So it's a very strange moment in which we're all gathering together to talk about loneliness under the pressure of possibly the biggest loneliness at least the Western world was exposed to for long, and yet we're still deciding, choosing to be lonely. I will try to cover several topics within the half an hour that I was given, and that will be a little bit about the concept, and then about the history, and why is it relevant, and what are its consequences, and is there anything we can do about it? I know I'm promising a lot, given that the time is limited, but there will be an opportunity for you to join the discussion, to share your opinions and to ask questions. So hopefully we will together manage to say something meaningful about loneliness. So let me start with the word. Some of you may be aware, for instance, that Freud's complete works are 24 volumes. That is possibly closer to 15,000 pages than to 10. So 50 years of unbelievable work energy and curiosity for everything. The 24th volume is the index volume. You can open it and see which concepts and names are mentioned in Freud and where. And this volume does not contain the word loneliness. So in the 23 volumes of Freud's books and papers, loneliness most probably wasn't mentioned even once. I'm emphasizing this because we might be taking it for granted. We might be believing that loneliness is everywhere, has been everywhere since forever, and there's nothing cultural or historical to contextualize it. Historical research has shown that loneliness is basically an unknown phenomenon before the beginning of Renaissance, or what most often in the English-speaking world is called the early modern period. The words like solitude, aloneness, and oneness and oneliness are the products of the late 16th and the beginning of the 17th century. And until the 19th century, until basically German and English Romanticism, that's not going to be a thing that people are going to discuss very frequently. Let me give you another reference about this. Try to free associate for a second when I say Robinson Crusoe. To most contemporary audiences, this is a novel about a lonely person on a desert island. Loneliness is not the topic of the novel. It is not represented as a painful emotion anywhere in the novel. So when it comes to words themselves, French and English have a derivative of Latin solitude, that initially represented one isolated person or object or phenomenon, and has over time grown to mean someone is alone and likes it. There's nothing painful about it. It could be a person enjoying a quiet moment. It could be a creative person looking for solitude in order to be able to focus on something, and so on. Then there is the term in English, the term aloneness or alone. And it is supposed to signify that someone is physically or socially not surrounded by other people. Given that someone is alone, we still don't know how this person experiences that, whether this causes suffering or joy or indifference. We don't know that. Then there is the word I mentioned. It started as oneliness. So beginning with one, someone is alone, one, not with other people. And then it became loneliness later on. And this term includes pain, includes suffering. Someone is alone and finds this as a very painful experience, would like to change it, would like to somehow go out of it and establish connection with other people. The first book focused on this was published around 1780. This is already the time when books have been written about everything. But loneliness was not important enough or present enough that it should be the focus of the book until then. It is present in Montaigne and several other philosophers before that, but in passing, not as the focus. How does it come to this? The ancient world and the Christian world were the worlds where people were defined by their social identity. In ancient Greece, when a person would introduce themselves, they would say the first name, then the name of the part of the city where they lived. So not Athens, but a part of Athens, and the father's name. So your identity consisted of three details: your personal identity, your social identity, your family identity. And in the ancient world, people believed that losing your social identity would immediately mean losing your personal identity or complete identity and becoming sort of a non-person. I'll briefly mention two examples. One is that when Socrates is offered to choose between leaving Athens and taking the poison, he chooses the poison. It's less painful to die than it is to leave the community, lose your identity, and live in loneliness and despair. And the second one is Oedipus. Once Oedipus figures out what he had done, and he feels guilt and wants to be punished, he asks from the people of Thebes to set him out, to kick him out of the city into the woods, where he will not belong to the community anymore, and so he won't be a human being, a person anymore. With the Christian world and the time of the social order that predates capitalism, people are not moving, they're not traveling, they don't have IDs or anything that would resemble IDs. So they die where they were born, belonging to the same social class that they were born in. Not the same with Islam, but completely like this in Christianity. With the beginnings of Renaissance in Italy, several strange phenomena start appearing. And that is that painters start representing themselves. It might be surprising to you, as it was to me, that until until specifically the year 1502, no one thought portraying themselves in a painting could be something interesting. Until that same period, no one thought writing an autobiographical paper could be interesting in any way. Painters start signing their works around that time. German painter Dürer is allegedly the first painter who does that, late 15th century. And everything develops in parallel with an epidemic of melancholy, of depression. Renaissance is famous for these two things, the discovery of the subject and the pandemic of melancholy. All most beautifully represented in Shakespeare's Hamlet. If you think about Hamlet, it lasts about 5 hours. And at that time, most of the audience was standing. Plays started at 2 o'clock on the open. There was no roof and no artificial lighting. And it could be rain or snow. Imagine people standing for 5 hours watching the play where the main character for 9 times talks to himself. The plot completely stops, no sword fights, no ghosts, nothing exciting, and a guy talks to himself. This is Shakespeare's masterful representation of solitude and the discovery of self-reflection. This became a very fashionable topic in the 19th century. In the classical music, in 19th century novels, especially in the tradition of the Bildungsroman, novels that are portraying the development, the growing up of a character, loneliness is everywhere, so that they would be able to think about themselves and what are they supposed to do. In a way, one tradition that comes out of this is psychoanalysis. Because many people believe psychoanalysis is the product of the specific historical moment when people started living in large cities. They were not surrounded by intimate friends so that they could share their problems with them. Religion lost its relevance, so confessions became less of a help than before. So people started coming to psychoanalysts where they would feel listened to, where they would feel they were enabled to finally find their voices. Psychoanalysis is called talking cure, among other things, because it allows people to finally start talking about what bothers them and no one else wants to hear about. And then we come to the 20th century and large cities all over the Western world and more on all the continents, where people are very often painfully isolated, surrounded by millions of people, where they know no one closely, and where if they want to share anything personal and intimate, they have no idea how to do it. And slowly but steadily, people lose the idea or the skills necessary for commitment. So the numbers that we were facing several decades ago were quite alarming. The numbers of people who lived in single-person households, the numbers of single parents, and the families with just one child, and so on, they were rising dramatically. Another problem that it seems we were facing was the change, the moving of social life on the internet. And here I cannot recommend you anything better or anything else necessary than the work of Sherry Turkle, the MIT professor who has written her first books on this topic in 1985 and 1994. She predicted that the majority of social life will be happening on social networks and not in the usual, old-fashioned, real social world. In recent years, and these are the things I assume you are familiar with, for instance, in Japan, it is now legal to marry a sociable robot, and people are trying to fight against loneliness through using artificial intelligence and similar stuff. So not having the human touch and the human voice, but still having someone. And what is going on over the last year has possibly made the situation more dramatic than ever. So many countries around the globe, and I'm sorry that I don't have exact numbers, but I assume you can easily imagine what I'm referring to. So many countries around the globe have at certain moments imposed certain forms of lockdowns where people were limited in their social activities as they were used to them. Let me tell you in a nutshell what the situation is where I live, and that is Berlin, central to Northern Europe. For instance, for a long time, it was not possible for two families to meet. It was just one person could visit one family. Then everything is closed when it comes to social life, cultural life, sports life. You cannot go to a museum, to a restaurant, to the gym. Nothing like that works. In my opinion, the most painful aspect of all this is that we are now entering the third semester when almost everything, 98% of everything will be online. And our students are at home in South Korea and Brazil and Ecuador and the United States, and they don't really have the college life, the student social life. And children are not going to regular school. Children aged 13 to 18 are again not having the usual social life, the sports, the flirting, the parties, and so on, which might have grave consequences for the future because they might be lacking skills or motivation, and so on and so on. There are many studies published in scientific journals, as well as, for instance, in Guardian, that predict that once the pandemic of the virus is over, the pandemic of mental disorders is going to start. One of the things, anxiety and depression, are reported in some countries to be 7 to 10 times higher when you're asking people, how do you feel? So this is not depression diagnosed by a psychiatrist, but self-reports. Then it could be followed by many other things. ADHD, uncontrollable impulses and aggression, and so many different things. Are we prepared? How are we going to deal with this? I'm not sure I can offer you a very good answer to this, although I believe we are all interested in this. In most of the countries, mental health care services are working worse than before because some of the employees might be working in other institutions or being overwhelmed by the number of calls or referrals, or might be suffering mental health problems themselves. So we have a higher demand and we can offer less. So this might be one of the highest priorities very, very soon. Why is this all relevant? Why does loneliness deserve so much time that we should talk about it tonight? Theoretically speaking, it is very important, I think, never to lose from sight the idea that we are a fundamentally relational species. Without relationships with other people, we cannot survive. In a nutshell, again, human infants are born so helpless. They cannot survive on their own. They cannot take care of themselves. And it is necessary for the very powerful attachment system to exist between the infant and the parent, or the parents, for the individual human baby and the human beings as a species to survive. So you can find many illustrations for this. One rather famous that comes to my mind is the experiments of the American social behaviorist Harlow, who in the 1950s did experiments with wire and cloth mothers. You can very easily find those recordings on YouTube, which showed that when infant monkeys are choosing between comfort, warm cloth on the mother, or on the artificial mother, versus milk on the mother who provides nothing, again, artificial mother, I'm sorry, that provides nothing but milk, in the proportion 20:1, they're choosing comfort over food. Another very important thing is the discovery of a group of Italian researchers led by Vittorio Gallese about 15 years ago, of what they called mirror neurons. When you're just observing someone else's action, practice, emotions, facial expressions, your brain reacts as if you are experiencing or doing the same. So that, for instance, when you have two groups of people who have suffered from stroke, and one group is going through recovery process, physical therapy, rehabilitation, and so on, and the other group is going through the same process, and then on top watches videos of people doing the same exercises, the latter group improves faster. We have many different or countless, possibly, different empirical studies about the recovery, where we compare people, for instance, who live alone to people who live with someone, or people who are never visited in the hospital to people who have regular visits from family members or friends or receive social support. The group that lives alone or is never visited recovers slower. Their health outcomes on the level of the body are never as good. When it comes to mental disorders, it is possibly the core experience, the most fundamental experience of, I think I could say, possibly every patient I have ever worked with. And there are many, many papers confirming this. Loneliness is an important cause for not feeling well, and then for trying to overcome this feeling in many, many different ways, through alcohol or gambling or excessive, so to say, uncontrolled, unsafe sexual behavior, focusing completely on your career and forgetting about the emotional life, and so on and so on. And then loneliness is extremely important as a consequence of mental disorders. When you don't know how to share your experience with other people, when you feel stigmatized, and around the globe, stigma against mental disorder is on the rise over the last 50 to 60 years. I personally assume because of television. So you don't know how to get in touch with other people. You don't know how to communicate what you feel, and there is a prejudice, and people feel like they wouldn't like to be in touch with you because you're dangerous. No matter how primitive, so many people still have the fantasy of mental disorders being contagious. I would like to mention only one more empirical study and then turn to what possibly can be done about this. At Harvard, there is an empirical study that started more than 80 years ago. And several generations of researchers have followed their subjects for, as I said, 80 years. They tested every couple of years, intelligence, well-being, personality traits, all sorts of psychological details. Among these subjects was one president of the United States. There were several schizophrenic patients and all sorts of professional, educational, and so on outcomes. One thing I would like to share with you, they're finding about the old age, people in their mid-80s, when they figure out who are the elderly people who feel best, who feel most content, whose well-being is on the highest level, this group is distinguished not by the schools, the amount of money, or this or that. It is distinguished by the quality of their social relationships in their 40s, in their middle age. So having a lot of friends, having meaningful friendships, being social and sociable makes you somehow healthy and vital into your old age. So this helps me now make a transition to what we can do about this. One thing is obvious. We can all try to be more social, to nurture our friendships, to never neglect the social life for this or that other cause or reason. We should, I believe, raise our children to be the same, to value the other person, the friend, more than anything material, and so on. On, so to say, medium level, it is again obvious that psychiatric patients value more than anything else the help of people who have had similar experiences to them. So self-help groups and support from peers is possibly one of the most important things in all of the professions, mental health care professions especially. Now, again, I don't know anything about business, but I imagine this does not exist there. I have never heard of a self-help group where managers, bankers meet and talk about their emotions. If I'm right, this is something that should happen as soon as possible. And finally, there are two countries, very well-developed countries at that, the United Kingdom and Japan, that have introduced ministries, departments for happiness. So in the government of these two countries, there is now a, I'm not sure what the American word would be, minister for happiness, a person who has a department in the government focused on what they should do and what should be changed in the society so that people, oh, I'm sorry, it is the Ministry for Loneliness, so that people would be less lonely than they are. So I'd like to stop here. I'm sorry this was longer than previously agreed, and I was possibly too fast, but hopefully now in the discussion, we will be able to remedy these faults. Thank you very much for your attention.
Alexander, thank you for that walk through the history and both ideas as well as actual Western history. And for those who are currently on, if you have questions, do send them over. I received a few, if I may. There's one that notes, how can single parents prepare for this coming epidemic of loneliness as it transpires, as it continues?
I'm not sure I understand the question completely. How should single parents prepare themselves or their children? And then what are the circumstances? Is there already a problem, or are we afraid it might appear? And then what's the society? I'm sorry that there are so many questions I'm posing, but it's difficult to give a straightforward answer.
I guess the person's noting primarily on the development of children. as they develop in this?
Yeah, yeah. So we're noticing for at least 15 to 20 years that there is change in the social behavior of children who are now growing up more with television and smartphones and computers than with actual human beings, so to say. The basic difference we're noticing for quite some time now is that children are less empathetic. They don't have as much opportunity as before to learn how to understand what the other person is feeling and what I'm supposed to do about this, because again, television, smartphones, and computers are offering something completely different. One thing that I'm aware of that goes against this, so to say, is the work of, again, Boston-based researcher Ellen Winner, who found that 10-year-old children improve in empathy when you introduce more school subjects related to the arts. You give them to read more, to sing more, to draw more, to make more theater plays, and they start understanding other people better and caring for them better. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. Expose your kids to beauty, to arts, and help them express themselves through play, drawings, singing, whatever, and things might get better. Another thing is, yes, we are all lonelier than we used to be, but at least in the small circles, we can try to spend as much quality time together as possible. Instead of everyone looking at his or her phone, instead of looking at watching Netflix all the time, as I heard one stand-up comedian say, I finished Netflix yesterday. Instead of that, try to spend time with one another, to ask questions, to talk openly, and to give your children an opportunity to express all of their concerns. I'm sorry that the answer is probably too vague, too general, but without knowing particular details, I don't know how to give you something more useful.
Another question is, to your point about stigmatization, do you believe that this pandemic and resulting social controls have served to further stigmatize mental illness and primitive fears and those who are suffering, or will this serve to challenge stigmatization?
Mm-hmm. So let me first elaborate a bit on the concept. Of course, everyone can think, I belong to a group that is or has been stigmatized, or is or has been stigmatizing another group. And this is a phenomenon we're encountering throughout history and in all cultures. But the specificity of the mental illness is that this is the only phenomenon we know of that has been stigmatized always and everywhere. If you start reading books about, again, ancient history, and if you read anthropological work for tiny islands in the Pacific, everyone stigmatizes against persons with mental disorders. There have been many various efforts to change this. I think it was in 2002, World Psychiatric Organization proclaimed our biggest problem is not disorders and medication, it is stigma. And they've been focused on it for almost 20 years. Stigma, unfortunately, is on the rise. Why? Because we work against it in very cognitive, rational ways. For instance, we meet tonight and we talk about it, and I may say a name or a year, you'll open a book, try to read about it and learn and so on. And then Anthony Hopkins plays a villain that is portrayed as mentally disordered, and the fear goes so much deeper into your person and into your brain that any cognitive rational message can that 100 years of lectures cannot fight against one movie. What will happen because of what is going on in the world now? I have to tell you honestly, I don't know. First, I think I'd have to have an IQ of, I don't know, 550 to be able to understand, to grasp this moment where so much is going on, possibly on an hourly level, definitely on a daily level, and then to predict. I don't think, I'm not aware of any institution, professional, governmental, and so on, that is at this moment focused on fighting stigma against mental disorders under the circumstances that we're living in. So I'm sorry, again, that's the only thing I can say.
We have another question here. Is isolation as difficult for introverted personalities as for extroverted personalities? Or even, or I would say, I'm sorry, even I would say from the big five, the different personality types, how they would take on loneliness.
So there's research about it, who takes loneliness with most pain. And for a long time, we believed this was the elderly, people in their 70s and their 80s who live alone. Things have changed, and loneliness now hurts young single male persons most. So men in their 20s, in their 30s, living alone, claim, report that loneliness is the worst to them. The distinction introverted, extroverted is extremely important here, because these two types were originally in the world of psychoanalysis by Carl Gustav Jung described as one tending to enjoy quiet time on their own, and another one always in need of exchange, interaction, something exciting happening in their lives. This is to a large extent confirmed by empirical research later on. We are no one of us completely one or completely the other. We are all some combination of the two, and might be one in one type of company or under one type of circumstances, and then change under the other. Let me mention again a very popular work, probably not older than 2 years, Quiet. The author's name, I think, Suzanne Cain, an American author who has written a book to defend introversion. The reason for this is that the big five that were just mentioned by Leo are focused on the extroversion as an important correlate of mental health. And this, I believe, is very typical of the large cities on the coasts of the United States. There you need to be extroverted, again, in terms of the big five, not agreeable, not really kind to people who might be interfering with your career, always fit, never sad, never lonely, never spending your time writing a diary, reading poetry, and such stuff. And this author, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, Suzanne Cain, wrote a book, Quiet, to defend introversion as an equally normal option for some people who might be predisposed to it and enjoy it.
Another question, and I believe we could take one or two more, and that is, what can we do in the immediate, this year, next year, in addressing loneliness, whether in our lives or in the lives of our loved ones?
I think this can be used as well as a wake-up call. Now loneliness is at the extreme level in the lives of most people. And this should somehow help us wake up and remember why and how social contact, friendships, love, families are important. So turn down, so to say, the focus on career, as I said, on watching this and that, on earning money and such stuff, and focus on other people. This is how we came to be here, other people. This is the reason that our lives make sense, other people. Focusing on the benefit of another person is what makes your life fulfilled. Let me briefly tell you, I worked for some time in psychotherapy with a person living in New York who was very successful, had a lot of money, in his 30s, seemed like everything, the whole world lay ahead of him, and he didn't feel fulfilled. He didn't feel happy. And one day, the change started happening when he started going to, what's the word for that? I'm sorry, I don't know now the American terminology. The kitchens where you can go and get a meal without paying. Like charity meals. So doing something for people, offering something other people without expecting nothing in return, gives you a very powerful feeling of belonging, helps with anxiety, depression, the feeling of purposelessness, and so on. So that's one of the things. There are many other ways to feel connected, to stay connected with people, and not permit either the current situation or the political influence or the technology that is now all pervasive in our lives to somehow alienate us from the people who are important. I always give too long answers, and then in the end I think I haven't said anything specific enough.
I believe they're actually, I couldn't remember either. It was Soup Kitchens, one of our audience members chimed in there. Thank you. It looks like we're coming to a close in our discussion here. To leave on a positive note, Alexander, in some of your writings, you note the positive aspects of loneliness and what we can gain from loneliness. Can you share a little bit about that before we come to a close?
So let me mention briefly. You need to develop in your childhood what psychoanalysts called the capacity to be alone. So a predictable, nurturing, caring figures that surround you should make you feel that the world is not a dangerous place, that the world is a place that is fun to explore, and that there is someone to protect you if the exploration turns out to be risky. If then this feeling from the interpersonal domain, from the exchange with the others, can become a solid feeling in yourself, there's not really a good way to describe this, but metaphorically speaking, and again, the metaphor might not be the best, if you can build a reservoir in yourself where other people's love and respect and care about you will be preserved long time, like the camel can have water, then you will be able to start playing. Then the moments of solitude will become very pleasant because you will have the capacity to play, and most importantly, you will lose in the play selflessly. You will forget about the time, you will forget about the space and what surrounds you. You will forget that this is just a simple pen. It can become whatever your imagination wants to make of it at this moment. And these moments are extremely precious in the lives of adults as well, through artistic or scientific creativity, through the hobbies you're passionate about, and you, without ambition or an actual objective purpose, you lose the track of time while you're doing something you're passionate about. Again, these are the especially important moments. One famous American psychologist, Abraham Maslow, called them the peak experiences, and they are what we remember the years or the periods of our lives by.
All right. Dr. Dimitrijević, thank you for taking the time to prepare for this event and,
sure.
and joining us tonight. I know it's almost 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock out there.
9 o'clock where I am, yes.
And
I thank you for the invitation. I'm really sorry I haven't seen any other face. I hope the other people were with us all the time, but it would have felt less lonely had we had the visual interaction as well.
Thank you so much, guys and gals, for joining tonight. And we'll work on getting this up online so you can share it with your friends, your loved ones, your colleagues. And join us for a future event. Go to aier.org, sign up, and stay tuned for future events. And thank you.